see at this end, but we see the slide. It's kind of Hi, Robert. Hi. Not too bad. Busy today. Just I can see that, yeah. One of those things. Yeah, yeah.
You want upgraded of switch?
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking that.
I know.
Don't think at the minute
Yeah. They try to test
I don't that wine to December and we'll deal with it.
looking for the position as well. So just getting the stragglers in, we'll be ready to go in a moment. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second part of today's event. Where what we're going to start off with here is talking about what we're doing in the DIY world and some people who are talking about their experiences. I'm going to start off by saying when we set up this presentation, we started off by asking Tech UK how many people in the audience came to last year's event, and I think their numbers were slightly out. So if you've seen some of this before, you'll recognise some of these slides. So, as we all know, diabetes is hard, and I've borrowed a few slides from Dana here because, frankly, they're quite good slides, and I like to reuse them. Just like everything else we do in the DIY community, it's all open source. So diabetes is hard, and we all know that it's a bit of a fight to keep things up and down, going up and down within a certain set of ranges. So why not reiterate this point as we go through these slides? Now, we've heard from a lot of people this morning about the tools that they have, the tools that they're building, the tools that in some cases talk to each other, that there are some people who are working to open standards and there are some people who may be working to slightly less open standards, but there is a push to try and get these things talking to each other. And what we can see very clearly is that this is going to take some time. So with a little help from the internet, open source and social media, we've been able to pull some of this interoperability together so that stuff can work with each other. And this is where we then go into the questions to the audience. How many of you in the room are already well aware of DIY stuff? There we go. That's the difference that people, the Tech UK's numbers didn't pick up on. How many of you are already using it? Right. That's a slightly lower number than I was expecting based on the first show of hands. So that's a good thing. So realistically, if we look at what the open source and DIY communities have come up with, there are three particular areas that they cover. It's kind of monitoring and reporting, it's decision support, and it's closed loop. Now, why have I broken them out like that? Because a lot of people don't necessarily want to jump straight into something like closed loop. A lot of people actually want to see something a little bit less what could be considered invasive, I suppose, in what they're looking to do. So we start off with monitoring and reporting, which is kind of where most people have entered the DIY community. We all know about, or hopefully most of us here know about the history of the DIY community and where We Are Not Waiting came from. Dexcom G4 not being shareable, basically, and the tools that were then built to get around that. So what we've then got, as we can see on here, and probably some of the bigger things in the last year, things like the Meow Meow, which, how many people in the room are using Meow Meows? That's quite a significant number. We've got Android APS, not yet got Android APS. We've got Xtrip, we've got Spike, which is new for in the last 12 months. And Spike is effectively like Xtrip for your iPhone. You don't have to use the Dexcom app, which is great. You can control your alerts. That's great as well. We've got Night Scout, kind of the granddaddy of all of this stuff, which allows the data to be shared in an interoperable format so that you can use it with other systems. That's kind of an important point in all of this. Visibility on a watch, so actually you can check your blood glucose wherever you like. And of course, things like this, which allow anybody using a Medtronic device to actually have their data uploaded into something or usable as a shared data source, so that you no longer have to pull your pump out to look at it. You can actually do it on a watch whilst you're wandering around. Excuse me. Yes, it only works on Android, but it's a damn sight better than having to lift your pump out every time, especially if you don't wear your pump on your hip as a useful device. So having all of these devices available to you to look at anywhere is a key point of what DIY has delivered. And that's what we encourage people like Dexcom and Medtronic to do more of. I don't think yet that the Medtronic Guardian 3 system can do the ability that gives you the ability to remotely monitor, for example, your child using Guardian 3. That's a bit of a downer for pretty much every parent using this stuff. So when are the device companies going to make those changes that people have clearly asked for and have done themselves? It's an interesting question, right? So I said the second piece of this is the decision support, or making your mind up, as I like to describe it in this one. I wonder if anybody else has noticed the theme in these headings yet. But so what I've got on here are a number of different pieces, and this is kind of what you might want to do if you don't want to do closed loop, or you think that's a big step. So tools like Xstrip and Spike include bolus calculators and this little pill here, a prediction in 1.5 hours. So what it uses is in Spike, there's a version of the OpenAPS original algorithm that can use the data you've given it around boluses and around carbohydrate and your glucose levels and predict out into the future, and you can specify what period you want to do that for, where your glucose level will be. Now, if you don't want to use a closed loop, or you don't have a pump and you're on MDI, you can see how useful this can be for people. Likewise, in Night Scout, you have the bolus wizard, what the P is, predictor, I think it was. But this is doing a similar job, which is telling you what your current carb ratio is, where it thinks you should be. And this is a simplified version of OpenAPS's algorithm that Solcaharo built into Night Scout. In addition, you've got the open loop tools within Android APS. So you can use Android APS with a virtual pump if you have a pump that isn't compatible, and it will tell you when it thinks you need to adjust basal rates in order to deal with highs or lows. These are all ways of interacting with your diabetes, but without having to have it run as an algorithm in the closed loop position. And that is what some people want. Some people don't want to go fully closed loop. This makes it available to pretty much anybody, because you can use these decision support tools with MDI. So you don't need to have a pump to do that, and that opens them up to anybody who is interested in looking further into these things. And finally, we've got this little box here. This is auto-tune. Now, auto-tune is designed, and it has limitations, we'll put that up to start off with. Auto-tune is designed to take your basal rates and to measure based on your glucose data and your carbohydrate data and blood glucose data, whether your basal rates are right or not. And it does that within a set of limits, and it is limited to people who only have a single carb ratio and sensitivity factor throughout the day. But what it does do is it gives you a reasonable prediction or guess, depending on what term you want to use, of whether your basal rates are actually aligned with where they probably should be, whether your carb ratio is where it probably should be, or whether actually you might need to do some work. Now, as always with anything like this, you are the arbiter of whether or not you make changes, but it provides some indication. And we know that it doesn't work for everybody, but you can have a look at it and decide whether you want to use it. There's a version online that will send you an email report. It depends on having Night Scout data, but it's and if you want to have the details of that, we can talk about it afterwards. I'm not going to put it up in the slides because there are some things to mention in relation to it, and because at the moment I think it's not fully tested outside of GMT, so you have to use it in the UK for various reasons. And then of course we've got the closed loop systems. Now you've all heard of all of these, or most of you have heard of all of these. OpenAPS, Android APS, and Loop. I think the biggest change that's happened in the last 12 months in relation to Android APS is that they've released version 2, which is bringing Android APS up to the same level as the current release of OpenAPS. So that includes functionality around insulin delivery as super microboluses. I'm not going to go into the detail of that now, but it's something that if anybody wants to know about can ask me. Loop's obviously had a number of iterations in the last 12 to 18 months to make some of its tools work more effectively. There have also been some interesting developments around things like bolusing for pizzas, for want of a better term. I can see that's getting the people sniggering. We all know how hard that is, right? One of the guys, Robert Silvers in the US, has put together, or he took the Warsaw method for fat and protein units. He built a spreadsheet, he worked out how it all worked, and then what he's done is he's taken that information and coded it up into a shortcut that sits in iOS, and there's a version that's been encoded into Loop. It's not I don't think it's in the release of Loop, I think it's in one of the dev branches, where you can tell it the macronutrients in pizza, and it will work out how to put carbs into the system so that it gives the right amount of insulin over the long period of time it takes to absorb the pizza without you going high. He's done lots of tests on it. There's a couple of videos on YouTube. But there's that kind of stuff is being done by the open source community to try and make living with some of these things easier. As everybody in the room knows, I hope, there are a number of key points about this stuff, and we know that we're in Loop's case and OpenAPS's case, you're having to use old Medtronic pumps. Android APS, of course, is using the Dana RS, and that's built to work with Android APS. And of course, you've also got the combo, which I suspect the vast majority of people with Android APS are using. It's designed with safety in mind. It's been built by people with type 1 or parents of children with type 1, and therefore they don't want to kill themselves. They don't want to kill their kids either, although sometimes they might feel like it. And it's designed to fall back safely to what your pump does. That's the key backer, that if it fails, then it's your pump that is doing the job. Now, worldwide, we say there's more than 10 million loop hours and more than 1,000 DIY users. As Typool mentioned earlier, they reckon there's around 1,000 to 1,500 loop users. We reckon there's something similar on the Android APS users. OpenAPS, it's probably the 1,000 users on here because that seems to be where most of this data comes from. So you can see there are a lot of people using these things now. That 10 million loop hours is probably a bit of an understatement. It's a lot of experience of looping. There have been a few studies that have been done, and that's what this data is pulled from. There was a 2016 self-reported study. 2018 is an interesting one. It takes the Data Commons data that has been submitted and pulls that down and uses that to show people's before and after numbers. You've got an Italian study done by a clinic in Italy, and there's another one in Korea which focused on kids, and they've all shown an interesting result in terms of before and after. I think what all of these graphs show you is that actually all the people who were put on these before had pretty good numbers compared to the general population. They all saw improvements, but it's still an interesting point. It's a global peer-to-peer support model through social media, which anybody who's in this room who's been using it will know about and is using, and hopefully is participating in and doing stuff with, because that's kind of a key point on this. You don't just need to do it, we need you to help each other do it, and that's a key important piece. And still, so far, we've not had any major safety issues reported, so what would be classed as adverse effects in clinical trials. That may be because people report things differently, or it may be because that people don't feel that things are that bad an effect. But so far, one thing we can say is nobody's died using these systems. And of course, the other thing is the significant quality of life improvements. The biggest thing that people talk about is no longer having fear of the dark. Sleeping without having to test glucose at night. That's probably the biggest benefit that people are taking away from this. And that for a lot of parents and a lot of people is a massive change. So now we're going to hand over to Linzi and Jacob to talk about their experiences with using DIY systems.
Hi, we thought we'd come up and just let you know a little bit more about it from an emotional perspective. We're not very techie minded. I was sat with my husband where you are this time last year, and then we just wanted to show you a little video of what happened in November this year.
Close my eyes, I'm going to pull it out.
It might do it on
Is it on the
yes.
James Pancreas? Oh, cool. Pump, intake, cartridge, cannula, insulin, extra phone.
I'll start looping today.
Yes. Is it actually? Oh, seriously? Oh my! Wow! 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 Wow!
So that was all.
Speechless.
That was a worthwhile investment for us coming up here up last year. So being here last year and seeing what happens in real life and the effect that closed looping had really made me stop procrastinating and decide that actually it was the time now to look at doing this properly and not just sit quietly on a forum. And I work in a school. I work with 300 year 11 teenagers, and I told them that that would be my New Year's resolution, to build a pancreas. Since then I've had quite a lot of interesting conversations regarding it with them. The build wasn't easy. I'm not techie. It gave me a few head scratching moments on how to trim that video, so I'm by no means knowing what I can talk about tech wise, but actually I'm very good at following instructions. It was normally my own lack of patience that caused me to give up and usually resort to red wine. But thankfully the DIY community don't allow you to get away with this. The support and the want from them to be able to change the lives, especially the lives of young people like Jacob. We just couldn't have done it without them, and especially one lady, Sarah Davis, you know who you are. As we know, life throws us curveballs. The first week of open looping didn't look anything like that. That's what we hoped we would get, open looping, but actually Jacob came down with a virus. Usually I'd stay at home with him, knowing that I could help keeping his bloods under control, but I went to work for the week and he was at home alone.
The first week it was tricky, as Mum says, because of me being ill, but knowing that Luke was watching my back and I wasn't having to worry about my bloods going sky high and then having to correct, and it had actually been the first time when I've been ill that I'd actually slept during the day, because I felt I could, because I knew Luke would sort it all out. I am super sporty, so having tough games and intense training sessions is very difficult with it. Often I'd go high and then I'd come crashing down low, causing my mum and dad not to get very much sleep.
I'd just like to say that since we started closed looping, well, open looping initially and then closed looping on the 18th of November, I've had an alarm one night only to get up and test him, and that is just phenomenal. For all of you in the know, you'll know what a life-changing event that's been for us.
Another great thing is, due to my sport and the lows, before when I wasn't looping, I would have to, I'd spend several hours in hypo, have tons of carbs, but now I'm having like maybe one hypo, and I'm having 3 to 6 grams of carbs to come out of low twos, but it doesn't always work. You've got times like this when it just doesn't really work to predict emotions, adrenaline, or me forgetting to connect up after celebrating a basketball win. But it does work hard to try and get you back in range and being able to give your parents another night's sleep. I had my first set of mocks in December, and it was amazing just to have the technology there, just to be able to just get on and get my head down, doing a maths paper. It was quite funny because my mum was able to text through to my phone, and actually was able to bolus me, and I didn't realise until my pump actually buzzed to tell that she had bolused me. Tim mentioned about SMBs. They've been absolute game changer, especially at the times on the side before. I'd be high, they'd just be continuously giving, and they would give it on times that you wouldn't expect to give it. Like I'd be 5, and it would give me a little bolus of like 0.3, and you wouldn't normally expect to have bolus for them. My watch is probably the favourite bit of technology. Same with terminology as in my lessons, with just a quick flick of the wrist. This is me bolusing from my watch.
That's Spike in the background, just in case you heard the 5.6 flat there. That's Spike talking his numbers. So we've loved the safety elements of working through the Android apps. Initially there's objectives to follow, so you're guided slowly and very carefully through it, which gives you full confidence and understanding why it's doing what it's doing. It's not perfect, you're not going to get green lines all the time, it's not a cure, but boy is it amazing, it's absolutely life-changing. This wouldn't be possible without the We Are Not Waiting family. The power of paying it forward within the Type 1 community, and we're very, very thankful that we could give our boy this opportunity. Thank you.
I'm going to try and use the microphone on here, so if anybody struggles to hear me, then do put your hand up and I'll switch microphones. I thought it would be, I wasn't planning on doing this, but just given what Tim said beforehand about the audience today, I just thought it'd be really interesting to know how many people here are here because they're interested in closing the loop, because they're interested in this kind of approach. And none of you have done it yet. You're all kind of motivated to find out more and do it. Well, that's good, I'm glad, because that's kind of what I've come to talk about, is how I did my journey over the last 12 months. I made this diagram to show how I saw the world of Type 1 technology until about this time last year. You've got this big group on the left, everybody in the world with Type 1. There's another group over there on the right, all of the world's programmers, engineers, hackers, scientists, clever people. And if you magnify it, you see this really tiny crossover between the two groups. I think those were the people who I thought would either be using or have the potential to use DIY closed loop. People who have just the right package of technical skills and were lucky enough to be Type 1 and could bring those two things together. And I think that probably is what the world looked like until fairly recently, until 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe that's how it still looks to some of you in the room today. Maybe you think closed loop is out of reach if you're not in that little intersection. But I think it's out of date. I'm very much not in that group of engineers on the right. I'm using Android APS very successfully. If anybody's pushed for time, I can really cut this talk down to 2 bullet points. First, it's not as hard as it looks. And second, if I can do it, so can you. There's an insulin pump on here buzzing, but it's not connected to anybody. It's really easy for me to make those claims, but maybe it's not enough to convince everybody listening. So I want to back up the claims, because like lots of you I now know, like Linzi, I was in the audience last year at this event, the first Rise of the Machines. I knew people were achieving amazing things with this technology, but frankly I felt completely shut out, and I came here feeling a bit of a sense of despair that all this amazing stuff was happening and I was learning more about it and I couldn't do any of it. But there was one particular speaker who isn't here today, a woman called Jen Pickford-War, who talked like I am now about her experience with Android APS. She stood up, she stood here and she said, I'm not a coder, I work in local government, I like knitting, and if I can do this, so can you. And that really hit me, because it made me think, actually, maybe I do have a choice. Maybe, actually, perhaps, I don't have to keep waiting any longer. This feels like a good moment to kind of show you what happened next in the form of a graph of my HbA1c results over the last few years. This goes back to 2014, so it's 4 or 5 years of results. Would anyone like to try and guess when I switched on Android APS? In case it's not obvious, I got my NHS Dana RS pump in June and started looping. In July, my HbA1c was 57. It had fallen to 45 3 months later. Last month, it was 43. And until that point, I had never met the nice blood glucose targets, the HbA1c targets, I'd pretty much given up hope that I ever would. And I know people have made this point already, there is significantly more to life than HbA1c, but if I could plot any other measures on this graph, anything like time in range, quality of life, just feeling normal and healthy, they would correlate very, very closely with that change you can see halfway through last year. And there's actually another closed loop story hidden within that time period that this didn't start at Rise of the Machines last year for me. Back in 2016, I was very lucky to be a volunteer on one of Roman Havorka's team's studies at Addenbrooke's with their closed loop artificial pancreas system. This is a picture from early 2016 when I closed the loop for the first time in my life with an earlier version of their algorithm. I used their system for a month, just long enough to kind of get a taste of what the future for people with type 1 could be like. Then I had to give it back and go back to the pump that I had before and the old school technology. It made me really uncomfortable because I knew about OpenAPS. It was clearly smaller at that point, but I knew about what was going on. I knew people were doing amazing things. I knew I didn't want to wait. But all of the technology I had was completely non-loopable at that point. It really, if I'm honest, it made me feel like a failure. It made me feel like I was failing to do the right thing for myself, for my family, for my life. And I felt completely trapped by the choices I'd made. And that brings me back to this point about whether closed loop is out of reach or not. Because I think if you've got to the point of thinking, I want to close the loop, I want to do this, but I can't, then really the barriers that I can think of fall into two main headings. There's I won't be able to do it, and there's they won't let me do it. For a lot of people, I think that first one is a huge barrier, the belief that this needs some kind of specialist skills that I don't have, and so it's too complicated, I won't ever make it work. Maybe it's this second barrier, that somebody's going to stop you, a clinic, a hospital clinic, a device manufacturer, NHS commissioners, a lawyer sitting somewhere is going to say, we can't let this happen. There's another obvious barrier that isn't on this slide, which is I can't afford it. I'm not including that today because I think it's a very different subject. But these two on the screen, I hope I can encourage you to think about your assumptions, maybe challenge them, maybe test to find out whether they're true. If you can't get a CGM and nobody will pay for one, then that takes more than positive thinking and challenging your expectations, because you sadly might be right. But let's talk about this second one first. They won't let me do it. When I came away from Rise of the Machines last year, end of last February, I emailed my hospital clinic at Addenbrooke's on the train on the way home from London to say that I wanted my next pump to be the Dana RS so that I could try to set up Android APS and close the loop. I was feeling really excited, and then I got home and I just sat there thinking, you're such an idiot. You just told them that you want to set up Android APS. They are never going to let that happen. And I was really quite worried about it. But to cut a long story short, I was completely wrong. The clinic team actually were brilliant. They have spent so much time figuring out how to support people like me who want to go down this road. I was one of the first who they had to make those decisions with, but they really did bend over backwards to be helpful. Closing the loop has been my choice, not theirs. I've been clear with them from the start that I'm the one taking the risks and that I'm comfortable with that. They've felt able to support me by providing access to the technology that I want to use, to the pump that I've chosen to make this work. And yes, there are risks to using a system like this. Tim touched on some of the unknown risks. I can understand why some clinicians might feel uncomfortable, but for me, you can see from that HbA1c chart that there are really obvious measurable risks to me through not doing it. Doing it, to me, reduces the risks in my life. And I think just that kind of honest dialogue with clinicians between people like me and the people who are the gatekeepers to technology, that's what leads to positive, supportive choices. People need to make individual choices that are right for them, even when they might stretch somebody else's comfort zone. There's the other barrier that I mentioned, which is I won't be able to do it, the practical stuff that you need to have, that you need to set up. And, well, first of all, it's called Android APS. You need an Android phone. Lots of them will work. This is the Samsung that I use at the moment, which was about £100 second-hand on eBay. You don't need a watch. Jacob has shown you that they're a very nice thing to have. I've got a second-hand Sony smartwatch, which is brilliant. You need an insulin pump that the phone can control over Bluetooth. Jacob uses the AccuCheck combo. The Dana RS is, I would say, significantly easier to set up based on conversations I've had with people. You need yeah, so you use CGM, some kind of CGM. I used the G5 until December and have just recently switched to the G6. You need some software on the phone to join all those things together. Like I think a lot of people, I use this program called Xtrip Plus on my phone that replaces the Dexcom app and does a great deal more. I think Dexcom technology is amazing and brilliant. Xtrip is much better than the Dexcom app. As well as that, you need the Android APS app itself. That's the brain of the system. That's where the algorithm lives. And I think this is where some people can feel overwhelmed. Because if you've never built a computer program before, if you've never delved into that world, it can feel very alien. It's easy for me to say this because I've done it, but I think actually the barrier is less about ability than self-belief and giving it a try. I wish there was time this afternoon to walk you through the steps so you could see that it is straightforward. Sadly, there isn't. But I think Linzi said the instructions are superb. It is very, very clearly set out online, and if you follow the instructions, you will get there. Even better than that, I think I would echo the point that even better than that is the support you'll get from the community online. It's really easy to make contact with experienced users. It's really easy to be in direct contact with the people who write this app and who make it, the developers of this system, the people who know it inside out, and they're really happy to help. People want this to work for you. It's an open source system. Nobody is making money out of it. They're doing it because they want it to work. I would recommend starting with these two Facebook groups, Luke UK, which Tim runs, and Android APS users, which is owned by the developers of Android APS. Join them. You will be straight into contact with people who can answer your questions and give you a lot more information than I can today and who can help you. A really nice feature that Linzi and Jacob mentioned is that you're not kind of launched straight into looping. There's this idea of objectives. Android APS won't let you do things until you've taken some baby steps to begin with and kind of prove to yourself and to the program that you can take them safely. It will take you by the hand from open loop to closed loop and beyond over the first few weeks of using the system. I have to say I found it very easy to make it part of my life. I showed you those HbA1c results earlier. This percentile chart is a kind of average 24-hour period over the last 3 months. I tend to get about 85 to 90% time in range, and I don't think I'm particularly good at this yet, and I find it really interesting comparing those figures with the Medtronic data that we saw this morning. A lot of the time I can just switch off and not think about my blood sugar because I know it will be okay. And I've actually just added a slide over lunch because it felt like standing here talking to you about this. It would be easy to say this is great. What I should actually do is just say I will take a picture of what my control has been like today with minimal input from me and show you what it looks like. This is 12 hours up to lunchtime, so I left this as late today as I could before taking the screen grab. But you can see that's just over 4 and that's 10 up there. So you can see really without me trying very hard, the system has achieved a great result. Linzi said it's not a cure. You have to remind yourself of that. It's a tool to support good control. You still need to know what's going in and out of your body. You still need to understand the factors that affect your diabetes and kind of accept that they'll change over time, and that's where things like auto-tune are so useful. It only works as long as you have accurate CGM data. But if you accept all those things, then I really believe this technology has the potential to change your life. I am a significantly happier, healthier and more relaxed person than I was a year ago because of this technology. That year included 10 days in hospital with a really nasty infection last summer, 10 days during which I stayed on closed loop and I rarely had blood glucose over 8 or 9 millimoles per litre. I couldn't bring myself to sharing the photos of me in hospital from that time because they were all a bit too gruesome. But I thought I would share this one because for the first time on an ultrasound scan, I got to see what my pancreas looks like. It's not supposed to look like that. It's meant to have sort of edges and a shape that doesn't. But during all of this, Android APS was giving me many times my usual total daily dose of insulin to achieve that level of control. And it did it completely safely, not a single hypo, through periods where I was incapable of managing it for myself. And really, I mean, I was taking huge doses of insulin compared to what I would normally take. I can't say that Android APS kept me alive because it was the antibiotics and the hospital team who did that. But I struggle to imagine how tough that episode would have been without this technology. I am incredibly privileged and lucky to have had that experience, even though I was so ill. I wish I had more time, but I have to wrap up, make time for some questions. And just to get back to what I said at the beginning, I think that Venn diagram idea probably was about right 4 or 5 years ago. There was a small group of really exceptional people who made it possible for these kind of systems to exist. It took those exceptional people to kind of get us to this point, to the point we're at today. But I believe that now this really is ready to grow and grow and grow bigger and bigger. Android APS certainly it's a solid, reliable, easy to use system. It's trusted by at least 1,300 people around the world as of this week, and the figure is probably higher than that. Anybody here or watching or listening or not here who thinks they could benefit, I think should feel completely empowered to join in with what's going on, to find out more, and to make a decision about whether this could be right for you. Don't feel shut out. Don't assume there are barriers based on any conceptions you have at the beginning. First, because it really, honestly, isn't as hard as it looks. If you want to do this, then you probably can do this. And I can say, from my experience, it can make a huge difference to your life. And second, because I believe when people like us, when people who choose to come to events like this and choose to do things differently, when we choose to manage a condition in new ways, I think that helps to break down more barriers. It helps to move healthcare technology forward for everybody so that in the end, everyone in the world who can possibly benefit has access to as much of this stuff as we can give them. So thank you for listening.
Okay, questions, but that video is very good. It's exceptionally good. Questions from the audience, please. Ben.
Thanks, guys. Really good presentation. I'm not even sure if my question's aimed at you guys. It might be better for the next one. But it seems like the availability of the garden pump seems like the optimal one. How are people finding getting hold of that with NHS?
At the moment, it depends on where you are, but I think that really is a question that we can give to the next team to come up and speak, because they are perfectly positioned to answer that.
Just my experience was that I think I was the first person in my clinic who asked for one. At that point, I think the price was slightly out of reach compared to other pumps, but the clinic team were able to talk to the UK distributors and the price changed, and as a result they can now offer it.
Any other questions? Yes, right, couple, right back. You might have to shout. They've got a long day. I don't think Ben can walk anymore.
Since looping a year ago, I've been meeting lots of parents, helping them figure out how to close loop. And like our final speaker, explaining how, like kind of that shift, that it's possible, just holding people's hands through it. And just wondering your thoughts on what can we do to make it a little bit easier for a layperson looking at all of this, not getting overwhelmed, and is there something that us loopers can do something to make it easier to get involved?
I'd love to have something magic to be able to say to you. I think the use of the forums in the family and the community that we have, and being able to tap into that essentially was amazing for me. I think more access to that, maybe outside of the groups, and us being able to put it out there a bit more for other people to to understand would help.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. I would see times when my mum was building it and she would get really wound up, and just the the advice and help that she got from the Facebook groups and the forums, they just never get, especially the guru, Sarah Davis, she just never gave up on her and pushed her right through to the end.
I think it's worth bearing in mind, given that your question is extremely loaded, in relation to could you make it into an app that you could distribute to people effectively. It's worth bearing in mind that all of the disclaimers that you agree to when you start using one of these things, which is it is an experimental system, and that you have to download and build it yourself, so that you are the person who is liable for doing it, because it isn't a medical device that is being distributed and has the backup of a huge company that has deep pockets for any legal cases. Now, are there steps that could be undertaken to change that? Yes, there are, but there are also things that need to be done ahead of moving into that direction. So I think it's fair to say that there have been discussions about that across both the US, where I know that Dana talks regularly to the FDA. I know that the guys in Germany, for example, have spoken to their regulators about some of the stuff that needs to take place. That kind of conversation goes on quite regularly to try and work out how you do the next steps that would take you to that stage. So I think that's the kind of thing that would need to be done in order to make it easier for people to get hold of, and at the same time allow healthcare professionals to recommend it to people.
Just, this is not a direct answer necessarily to the question, how do you make it easier for people? But one thing I've been talking to the clinic in Cambridge a lot about is having the ability to, when somebody comes to them and says, I'm interested in doing this, actually finding a way for it to be okay for them to put them in touch with somebody like me or another patient who is doing this, and kind of for the hospital to be happy with that. And there have been quite a lot now where, in my area, we've had quite a few people who have kind of come through the hospital, and we're now speaking outside the hospital setting and kind of making it okay to have that conversation. That might be something other people could take to their clinics and say, if you already have the knowledge to do this, speaking to a clinic and saying, how can I make it okay for you to almost refer people on to me where they want help that you can't give them?
Okay, time.
Just on that point, actually, one of the things that most hospitals have is, and most clinics have, are peer support groups. So there's nothing to stop you turning up at those peer support groups and going and talking about your experience, which makes you somebody that people become aware of. And even if only one person comes to you and says, oh, I'm interested, then maybe that's another way of making access easier.
Our clinic actually have asked us if we'd be part of a Skype group, so that we'd be able to get it out there to other families that are interested, and help that way.
Okay, we have one more question. Did I miss? Yeah, let's get the question in.
Thanks so much for that. I'm a pharmacist myself, so I know a lot about incidence and how basal rates work and all that. I mean, everything I've heard so far today is about how great basal adjustment works and that. Is there anything to do with bolusing in the future?
So the systems work in slightly different ways, but both Loop and Android APS include bolus calculators that take into account insulin on board from various temporary basal rates or already given insulin. AutoTune also includes a calculation around carb ratios, as long as the data you've given into it is good around your carbs and that it's getting good data from your pump and your CGM. So there are tools around that are there to help with carb ratios and bolusing, and also around how you bolus for things that are more difficult to deal with, like as I mentioned earlier, the fat protein unit model from Warsaw, which there's an app you can put on your phone, a shortcut on your iPhone, sorry, you can press the button on it when you put the data into it about the food, and it will put in the carb amounts on Night Scout or into Loop that would be the equivalents needed to enable an APS system to give you insulin to keep you flat-ish, for want of a better term, through doing that. So people are coming up with these tools, and that's the great thing about this stuff being open source. The code's available, and there, if you want to try something, you can do it on your own to see how it works out, and if it works, you can publish it. So there are some things being done around helping with meals.
Okay, so I'll close that session with just one comment, is that, so I think it answers some of the questions, some of you, why don't we do this more? The meaning of the word physician is healer, you know, whether it's an intervention by a surgical or a medication, etc. And we are in a space of world of type 1 diabetes, whereby patients, due to whatever reason, due to the system, due to the issues, have decided to take them upon themselves, right? We'll try and get our diabetes better ourselves. It's up to you. So perhaps the role of the physicians and the whole healthcare community becomes more of a facilitator to make that happen. And I think that's where the policy role sits. So I think if you hear Jacob's story, if you hear what James has done, and James was actually more angry last year, you're right. And remember now, you're asking me more angry questions. So I think there is a need to recognize that, you know, and I think it crystallizes perfectly what I said at the beginning of the day. The long-term condition, not just type 1 diabetes, is about self-management and peer support. You can't have a better example of that. Managing your own type 1 diabetes, and you're looking at your other peers and learning from them. So I think the system will evolve, and it is evolving. We wouldn't be having this conversation, would we, 2-3 years ago? We are here, it's moving. So then give space, and I think a lot of the next panel will also take some questions, but a big round of applause. Thank you so much. All right, so the next panel, the last panel of the day, which open questions. So we're going to invite, and I'll do a little summary of who they are. I'll invite Simon Eccles to come up on stage. We've got Emma Wilmot. Who else we got? We got MHRA. Somebody from MHRA here. Did they make it? Are they in the audience? There you go. Slowly make. Have you heard so much? You're going like, I'm not sure I want to be on stage now. You're okay. Excellent. Good. Who else did we have? Anybody else apart? That was just me. Is that it? What does the list say? So, Lesley Jordan from Input. Right. So I'll tell you the whole concept of this last session. And I'll tell you who everybody is. It gives you a bit of an overview. So we have, I'll start from the far end. Right. A blue screen. I'll start with, and I'll ask everybody to do a brief overview as to where they are. We got Lesley, who's somebody living with type 1 diabetes herself. She'll give her overview. We've got colleagues from MHRA. We've got Emma Wilmot, who leads the Diabetes Technology Network, consultant colleague from Derby. And we're particularly delighted to have Simon Eccles. And the internet is a wonderful thing. You find things about people. But, so you've got to correct me if I get things wrong now. You used to be or are an emergency physician. And he is now the Chief Clinical Information Officer for the whole of the NHS, across NHS England improvement. We talk a lot about interoperability. Some people ask, well, data, it's my data, I can't, what is going on? And I'll let Simon go through a few things, but all I can tell you for us at NHS England, it has been fantastic to have Simon doing the work he's doing. There's a lot of the content, and Sam Shah is in the audience as well from his team, and we can tell you lots of stories about how Simon has been helping moving things along, which in the past would have been, now we just don't do that. So, shall we start from far end? Lesley, do you want to use the mic and just pass around? Just tell us a few things about you, and then we'll do some questions.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Right. I've had type 1 for 50 years now. I am currently using Android APS with Combo and Dexcom G6. I also, when it's working, use a Diaport, which is another piece of technology that might be the future for a few more people, but currently it's very niche. So I'm going to start off by talking about the context in which we're talking about making access to technology more fair. Working within the context, you've got to remember that we are battling against a whole number of other conditions to get as much funding as we possibly can. We talked this morning about how the tools have to spread across all the different conditions, so they seem a bit blunt when we're talking about type 1 diabetes. You've also got to show within that widespread setup the value of something, how it's going to improve the person's life, and how it's going to, how much it's going to cost the NHS. So, in order to get something used at all, it needs to show some kind of value. If you improve the value or lower the cost, then more people can have it. So, criteria are set there not just to limit the number of people that can get hold of things, and therefore limit the cost of the NHS, but also to pull out the people who are actually going to benefit from using it. And so far, the research shows that unless you are really engaged with managing your diabetes, unless you know what to do with the results, and you're prepared to spend a lot of brain effort in making use of those results, then you are not going to benefit from it. So they're not going to make CGM, for example, available to everybody with type 1 until either the cost comes down or the value goes up. Now, I remember weeing in a pot before I went to bed to see if I was going to be safe overnight, which was quite bizarre because that would tell me what my glucose was about 4 hours ago, and it was as precise as under 10 or somewhere over 10, and usually it was the latter. But that was what enabled my parents to feel that they would be safe getting a night's sleep, and that, you know, I would still be with them in the morning. When blood glucose testing came along, I remember my clinic giving my parents my first blood glucose meter and saying, "This is worth £300, so be careful with it." And it certainly wasn't something I'd throw into my school bag and take around with me, quite apart from the fact that you had to actually draw a drip of blood off of your finger that would drip, because you couldn't touch the strip to the drip. And so there were limited numbers of strips we were allowed to get. There were a limited number of meters that were given away by the clinic. It wasn't for everybody. When we moved on to strips that that didn't need so much blood, I don't know if any others in the room remember this, but we were asked to cut our strips in two so that from each strip you could get 2 tests. That saved a bit of money. Now we look back on those things, look back on £300 meters and think, wow, haven't times changed? Some people are still being limited on their strips, I know, but that's a postcode issue and it shouldn't be happening, so please let us know if it is. But on the whole, you can get, as somebody with type 1, you can get as many test strips as you need. It's not a battle to get hold of these things anymore. There will come a time when sensing is the new normal, but it's going to take time to get there. And that's not fair when #we are not waiting. But the fact is that within the NHS, it takes about a generation, it takes about 15 to 20 years for any new device to become widespread in use. And that's across all of the conditions, all of the disease areas. So how do we speed up that process? I'm not sure. We, at the moment, when we answer individual people's questions, we have to help them work within the system that we're using. We want to, when we're dealing with policy, we want to help to change the system so that it's not such a blunt tool, so that something that is going to be a huge benefit to some people, but not to everybody, can be made available to those people who are going to benefit from it. One of the things that we need to do there is to train healthcare professionals, not just how to take advantage, how to use these bits of equipment, and train the users how to use them, but also train healthcare professionals how to determine who is going to be a patient that's going to make best use of it. Not just on numbers like how many times they test per day, what their HbA1c is, whether they're carbohydrate counting, and are they attending clinic often enough. But the psychosocial aspects of a person that means that they will totally put everything into this thing to make it work for them. And being able to pick out those people from a crowd without looking at bare numbers would be a really, really, really useful skill. So ultimately, I think it would be brilliant if we could change the system somehow so that the way to determine the value of a device for people with type 1 is measured differently. But how we can do that within the enormous ship of the NHS is beyond me at the moment.
Okay. Thank you, Lesley. You've answered my first 3 questions. Thank you. MHRA colleagues, would you like to say? So I'm going to say something about MHRA. We have been working with MHRA on quite a few things, and it's been fantastic working with them because it's been a really good work, I would thought, on both devices and those statements we put out. That's a good example of how you work with regulatory bodies as a policy team. But I'm not going to speak much about that. Why don't you guys say what you do and what brings you here?
I mean, yeah, that's one of the reasons we thought we'd come along today, just to let you know a little bit about what we do. We're quite different from the FDA, which there's been lots of speak about. So we don't actually approve devices to go onto the UK market. It's a different setup in that currently the EU we are still a part of. We actually, Emma and I work in the devices section of MHRA. And what we do is post-market activity. So when we get information from manufacturers, yourselves as users of all these medical devices, when you have a problem, we assess them, we look at them, we work with manufacturers to try and make improvements, try and make things better for users, and we try and push the manufacturers to try and look and take some responsibility, and also look at what they can do to help you. This is predominantly our role. I think Groban said he was involved in quite a lot of CI trials. That's another thing that we actually do a lot of. Emma and I actually review assessments from trials. We provide information back to them before the CE marking gets laid out for the device itself. So I mean, I hope that gives you a little bit of appreciation of what we do, and it is just predominantly the devices side we cover, not the medicines side.
No, thank you, Emma.
Yeah, so I'm a consultant in Derby, and I'm also a bit of a freak because I'm a healthcare professional who also has type 1 diabetes. So I've been living with type 1 diabetes for 30 years, and I actually feel it's a real privilege that day in, day out, my job is speaking to other people with type 1 diabetes. I think all of you that are here today understand the value of peer support. My peer support is my job, so I absolutely love it. So I am very much an advocate of let's get the technology that we need into the people in the hands of the people that need it. When I started as a consultant, I very quickly became aware that things like access to pumps, CGM, etc. varies massively. And even where people get access to how that technology is used in different services varies massively. So one of the first things I did as a new consultant was set up the Diabetes Technology Network, which is basically designed to upskill healthcare professionals that try and reduce the variation in how the care is being delivered. And in that role, myself, Steve, Lala and others have tried to develop best practice guides around how to make the most of pump therapy. We've got one coming out on CGM, because I think, you know, I've heard stories from lots of people. There's a variation there that we need to tackle. And here we're talking about the latest tech, but actually let's get the basics right. We know that in this country there are some areas where you've got less than 5% of the population are on pump. There are others, say, if you go to Lala Centre, almost 50% are on pump. Let's get that, you know, the funding for pumps is mandated. If you meet the NICE criteria for a pump, you should get it. And if you're not getting it from your service, walk with your feet. You know, approach us. We are more than happy to put you in touch with centres that we know are good wherever you live in, and get that message out there. I think the one thing we have to learn from the Free Cell Libre story and the increased access is that actually you guys are really powerful. If you make enough noise about it with the support of DUK, JDRF, things will happen. So if things aren't working out locally, speak to the network and start making a noise about it, and let's all push in the right direction to get the basics right. Let's get better access to pumps, better access to CGM, and hopefully down the line that will pave the way for better access to closed loop.
Thank you. Simon, a little bit about you and your role.
Oh, okay. Hello, and thank you. You'll be delighted you are going out on the internet, so hello. Having paid some attention this morning, I had promised to have lunch with the family today, so I apologise I couldn't be here earlier today. But I promise is a promise, and I was sticking to that one. I'm the national CCIO, so I'm effectively the national director for information technology across the NHS and social care, which is an interesting job title to announce to people. as either they glaze over instantaneously and that puts back to that dinner party, or alternatively, you get this, well, hasn't that been tried before and failed conversation, to which the answer is yes, we haven't spent a lot of money and no, not quite as much to show for it as you might be expecting from £12.5 billion. But here we are, with a commitment in the long-term plan to digitise secondary care particularly, but to digitise integrated care systems, by which I mean trying at long last to say that general practice, community pharmacy, mental health trusts and the acute and tertiary sector will join, so from the individual citizen's perspective, that appears to be a seamless service. And as I suspect many of you in the audience will attest much better than I, it isn't now. And as an A&E consultant, I can tell you it isn't now, because in A&E our job is to see people who have fallen through the cracks in the system. That's what we do. We see injuries as well, by literally falling through the cracks. But we see an awful lot of where people's health just hasn't worked out the way they expected, or they're not in the geography they're normally treated, or the system hasn't responded well for them. And it's not good enough, and we need to be better at it. And so I was bumping along, having quite a nice life as an A&E consultant in London, and got tapped on the shoulder and said, you really ought to apply for this job. And I looked mightily nervous and talked to my wife for quite some time, eventually my wife. It's too good an opportunity not to be part of this. We've got a phenomenal, I'd suggest once in a lifetime chance to try and get this right, to be given a second chance to do it. So I can talk for ages and I won't, Partha, because I've got lots and lots of bits, but just to come on to one of the things that has come up quite a lot, of how we help demonstrate that the, I'd suggest, revolution that you're part of moving care from being something utterly controlled by us, the physician, and aren't you lucky to receive it, into care that is owned by the individual person for whom it is most important to you, and we are your advisors on your terms in how that care is best managed. Now that is quite a revolution, and some of the NHS is ready, and they're here and they're evangelists, and you might tell me that quite a lot of the NHS isn't really ready at all, even outside the diabetes field in primary care, in emergency departments. Suddenly the NHS snaps back into we're in charge and we'll tell you what's good for you. No. We will change that with transparency. So we need transparency of your success. We need transparency of the effect, the apps, the different processes, the way people are monitoring their glucose, the peer support, and the benefit that's giving. The NHS, as has been pointed out earlier, responds well to data and is quite slow to do it. I think we're going to see a real change in the disease pattern 50 years out. In renal disease, in eye disease, in blood pressure control, in strokes. That's going to be fantastic and make the product clearly and obviously worthwhile for absolutely anyone who can get on with them. I suspect we'll also see the products developed to automate to a much greater extent than they do now, which will be fantastic. But we need that data, we need to collate it, we need to use it with tremendous advocacy to show why the 5% region isn't good enough, and the benefit that everybody, the whole system end to end, gets from the 50% regions doing something very, very different.
Thank you. You can see why I brought Simon along. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story as to what sort of, so we do our own work, and we have a call, don't we? A medical director's call sometimes. We all chat around over teleconferences about how we're going to change the world and all that. And I didn't know who Simon Eccles was. I saw the title CCIO and I was like, don't know what that means. And while I was listening, and most of the time you listen while you're trying to do some other work, which is true, isn't it, Sam? Actually, oh no. But what I remember listening, suddenly I remember Simon, isn't it wonderful that some people with type 1 diabetes have taken control of their lives? And I remember going like, oh, hang on a second, I need to Google this man now. And what I heard was exactly what you've heard. I mean, he's in the position he is, he's in the position of influence, and we work quite closely throughout the NHS. And I know it sounds, and I keep on saying that to people, it's very difficult to, I know, understand, to sometimes go like, well, is change happening? Is it really? Or is it just nice media spin? And I think the examples I can give you is that we do work with a lot of people who you will not see in the public limelight, who do a lot of work trying to make this happen. And I think Simon is one of those individuals who is doing that work. And a lot of the other people here, and I have deliberately asked MHRA and others to join, because there is a lot of work that people are aware of and doing to try and make what I said, give the power back to the patient, that we do it on your terms rather than the other way around. But it takes time to change. You're changing decades, centuries of how healthcare professionals have been drilled to work. So I think that sort of is the realization here, and I think you have somebody from the informatics doing their own work in digital. You get, I can't think of a better lead of the Diabetes Technology Network. She's done some brilliant work here. Emma, Elizabeth Tyler, herself, MHRA looking at are the devices good enough? What happens after they come to market? What can we do to guide? And you've got Lesley, who's done some phenomenal work with input, trying to help people access. And then you've got us in NHS Diabetes. So that's a rough summary of who we are and what we are trying to do. We've got time, so I'm not going to actually deliberately open this up to any questions, because you will not have a better panel to ask your questions at about what do you think the challenges are, where your frustrations are, what are we actually doing. Some of the things we are doing, people may not even be aware of. So, over to the floor. Questions, if you have any. Ben's going to go first. Go, Ben.
Sorry, guys, I was jumping. Andrew mentioned the microphone. Microphone. Can you hear me at the back now?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you. There's a very specific commitment in there. There's another one around CGM for pregnant women, less relevant to me, but one day, who knows? the way technology is moving. I suppose the difficulty I have, it's great news, it kicks in, the Libre national funding, I believe, kicks in April. Come April 2019, I will have been using that device for 5 years. And the way the technology is moving, some of the technology is verging on obsolete. So we've already heard that Libre 2 is on the market in Germany, is coming at some given point in the future. Yeah, how can we use that case study? So not looking at Libre specifically, looking at all of the technology that's coming down the line, looking at a very exciting marketplace, and we heard from a lot of the companies this morning. I mean, 6 of them that were in this building, so there are at least double that out there in the ether as well. How can we make it so that it's not 5 years before cool stuff comes out, I buy it, NHS gets it 5 years later?
Okay, I'll answer the question partly, and I think Emma and others will sort of give their views. So if you look at the whole saga of Freestyle Libre and etc., there's quite a few lessons you can pick up. I think the first one I would say is that it shows the system going through a lot of struggle. It shows about different priorities from where people are. And I think as far as technology goes, when was Libre launched in the world?
2014.
To Leslie's point, and she's right, technology takes us 10 to 15 years to get in the NHS. We are embedding it in 4. Step forward. Okay. CGM in pregnancy. Research came out, was published in 2017. End of 2017. 2019 April, you'll have it embedded in the NHS. It is moving, but it takes time. So I think the lessons I would say is that as far as technology goes, one of the things, and I've been very vocal about it, I think all the industry partners also need to work together if you want to push all your products through, and that needs to happen, because if you don't make that happen, then you will struggle, because it is a very, very quick changing field. So I think being nimble enough to work with organizations like RMOC, work with the DTN, I think that's what's needed so that we can make those changes. And to your point specifically, let's say Libre 2, for example, that's a conversation we're having with the company. We know it's changing. So our question back to the company is, when are you launching? What are you going to do with the Libre 1? What is the pricing? Where are you going to place it? Is it going to replace glucose strips or not really? So that's a conversation we are up for, and as I've said throughout the day, and I'm not just me, there's many, many people within the team who are very open to having a discussion with tech industry about that at any quarters. And you've heard the Tech UK, we've had the meeting. So that's something, as I always say, I'm here. And if you can't find me here, I'm on Twitter. And just come and find me. It's very easy to find us.
Thanks, Mark. I probably should add that without the kind of consistency
That is a very polite word.
So the guys this morning have shown
Thank you. No, you're calmer now, so it's all good.
Definitely. I suppose I don't feel like I'm focusing on something that is kind of for the benefit of the few rather than the benefit of sorry, let's start again. I don't want to focus on something that feels like it's just for the benefit of the few, because there are things you could do that have benefits for far larger groups. But one thing where I'm aware of inconsistencies is when people go to a clinic and say, I want to do this, I want to close the loop, can I have a RS pump, please? And it's not consistent. And I know there are people out there who want to get access, who are happy doing it themselves, but can't. And I just wonder what, if anything, can be done to help hospitals feel, help clinicians feel okay. Maybe doing what they feel is taking a risk. How can you help them with that?
Have the same question on the live feed.
And I think, this is a hugely controversial area at the moment. I have to say, so in Derby we've got 11 people that are doing annual DPS survey, and when the first couple of years were going through it, we often said, oh my goodness, we don't know anything about it. We're using NHS funded equipment to use this. Where do we stand? And so what I've done is spoken to the Medical Protection Society and spoken to different organisations and tried to get feedback on where we stand as healthcare professionals. Now the feedback I've had is that as long as I can counsel the person in front of me about the risks, and I have to state that we actually don't know most of the data that Tim's shown you is self-reported data. We don't actually know the answer to the question, how safe is it, what are the risks? So in my own clinical practice, we have a rule in the clinic that we don't promote it, because we can't seem to be doing that because it's not regulated. But if somebody comes to me and says they want to start on it, then I'm happy to support them, but I document the risks, and in this instance I say the risk could be hypoglycemia, decay or death. And that sounds extreme, but the bottom line is we don't know, and the difficulty we have as well is the people that are using at the moment are what I would consider expert users. Certainly my experience in Derby is the people that are going on, just like Tim showed you, are people that have got excellent glucose control going on to it already. They know how to change their insulin to carb ratios, they know what their insulin sensitivity is, they know how to program their basal rates. And I actually feel relatively comfortable with people using the system because they get type 1 diabetes. And the sad reality is that the average person with type 1 diabetes in the country struggles with a lot of that. And my worry would be that if you don't know your insulin to carb ratios and how to make them get where they need to be, if you don't know how to optimise your basal rates, and you don't know how to test your carb correction factor, your insulin sensitivity factor, then when you go onto this system, you might encounter problems. And I think that's where the community comes in. I think Tim and myself and Alistair and Lesley having conversations about this. It's about making sure that people are as good as they can get before they make the step onto this. And if you're in the situation that you can't get hands on a day in a pump, or your clinic aren't willing to support you, again, ask the community what's the nearest hospital that will support you and walk with your feet.
And I think I agree with all of that, and that's all completely true. The thing that I think I would add above that, just from the kind of given the responsibilities that you guys have within the NHS, is thinking how do we get that attitude, that approach to be more prevalent.
So I'll give you a bit of an answer on that. So one of the things we look at is procurement, right? And that's a nightmare because that causes variation because everybody does their own thing. The NHS, the thing about the NHS, it's a wonderful beast. I've worked in 4 countries, and I can't tell you how amazing the NHS is. I'm not sort of a dyed-in-the-wool sort of person going like everything's perfect with the NHS. But what the NHS is not good at is working as one. Okay, and procurement is a part of that. So you have different places doing. We'll just have 2 pumps. Some places go, we'll have 1. Other places go, no, you can have any. And that's something we are trying to standardize at the moment, trying to get to a point where all the options are available, so that centres can't turn around and say, well, actually, we would have loved to, but it's not actually available on our system. And I think that's wrong. So that's something, so one of the things that we do with NHS Improvement is getting it right first time. And the whole point of that is looking at making sure you've got a standardized way of doing it. That work is going on. I would, however, add that we actually haven't had a formal contact from Dan. So it's a two-way, it's a two-way street. We have had contact from Roche, Medtronic, everybody about what's needed to be on the, we have not had anything. So it is a two-way street as well. You know, I'm not going to. It's only so much we can do about going out. So that's the sort of message I go out to industry and go like, "I want to do this. Let's do it together."
Also, just in defence of some centres, so I want you to imagine if you're a pump centre and you've got 25 clinics in pump, would you prefer that the staff that you're seeing all know how to use one pump in those 25 patients well, or would you want a team that have got experience of using it in 3 users and a range of different pumps and actually they've not got the level of expertise in any of them? And that's the sort of decisions that centres are facing. The last thing you want is a team without this experience to support you, and that's why some places won't have as big a range of pumps as others. But again, if there's a pump type that you really want and it's not offered locally, move to a bigger centre that does offer it. You know, you have to walk with your feet. You don't have to stay in the same centre. And again, it's getting that message out there. A lot of places struggle with staffing. We know from the 2012 pump audit that one of the major factors limiting uptake of pumps was staffing. The amount of staff required to deliver a big pump service is huge, and unfortunately a lot of services don't have staff to run pump services safely.
Okay. Do you think it would make sense for the NHS to change its model?
No, that's not working.
Do you think it would make sense for the NHS to change the model for diabetes care, and instead of having local clinics looking after people and having multitudes of pump clinics with single pumps, we should instead have super centres for regions that then manage this stuff?
Did Pratik set you up for this question? I just want to know.
I have not actually spoken to Pratik about this.
I mean, this is a hub and spoke is what you're talking about.
It is, yes.
I think I would say to wait for the work we are completing at the moment. So I've been to 52 hospitals around the country. There's only another 103 to go. When that finishes, we will have to publish a report as to what we find, and there is a huge amount of variation in understanding of technology. You also have to think about the centres and how they operate and what they do. Do we sort of say everybody can do type 1 diabetes care, but if you don't really have technology training, then you should be in a place where there is training, like it happens with vascular surgery. That's something that's got to be based on evidence and not anecdote. And I think it doesn't really simply say that because it's a university hospital, a big hospital, it provides good care. It is not the case, categorically. I've been to places which are very small centres and provide exemplary care. Hospitals you'll never hear about because they don't go and tell anybody about it, right? So I think there's a fine balance to be struck as to what we do with that, but I will wait for that work to finish because one of the fundamental part of the work is looking at type 1 diabetes care. And I'll finish with this because I know Simon wants to say something on that. One of the fundamental questions we ask, question 1, how many type 1 diabetes patients do you look after? Do you think that's an easy question or a difficult question for a diabetes centre?
You'd hope it was easy.
Most people don't know. So the next question we have is that how many people do you have on pumps? Most people know that, but we don't have we have a situation where the denominator and numerator does not exist properly. So you don't even know what percentage of people is. That's the level of problem we face. So I think there's a lot to be done, but your point is made, and I think lots of people are saying that as to, but what qualifies a super centre? What is the training? So the final bit of that would be the work that we're starting with the CGM in pregnancy. I suspect it will come down to if you're not trained to do CGM, maybe your pregnant type 1 shouldn't go to you. You should go to a centre who knows what they're doing. And I think it's up to the person with the pregnancy to say, do you know what? I don't mind travelling a little bit to be looked after somebody who knows what I'm doing. We would do the same thing if this was bariatric surgery, wouldn't we? We shall see.
And that would need a bit of support from people like the UK and the JDRF to publicise the fact that you as a patient have the ability to move with your feet and to make those decisions. The clinic is not the be-all and end-all.
Nikki Jewell is there, nodding her head strongly. I can tell you she's a big fan of technology and what we want to do. Simon?
What I was going to say is that we are, I think, on the cusp of providing the opportunity that geography doesn't matter nearly as much anymore. And so we're seeing that in our primary care offer for general practice. There is the technology available to make basic care available nationally with the option to drop into local face-to-face requirements as people need it. The data can be collected from wearable devices and sent absolutely anywhere to be analysed. And the graphs and everything else you get for peer support and all the rest don't have a geographic limit to it in the way they do now. When I first trained, when I was still a medical student, I vividly remember working with a surgeon at a place which remained nameless in Essex, dealing with age. But to be fair, I suspect he's retired by now because I've got an older. Who was extremely excited that there was a thyroid tumour on his surgical list that afternoon. He said, I haven't done one for over a year. They bleed like stuck pigs. The anaesthetist looked like he was going to cry before the operation started. But the idea we were going to have a bash at a thyroid. That doesn't happen now. My mother-in-law needs a total knee replacement.
This is live.
I've actually embarrassed myself. Anyway, my mother-in-law needs a total knee replacement. That's fine. We were able to look up her surgeon to see exactly how many total knee replacements he'd done in the previous year, and able to look up the outcomes derived from those. The world is changing here, and the model you'll be familiar with in some cases that is completely traditional, buttoned down tight, and is based around the knowledge of the clinician and a relatively small number around that, is going to get swept away. For those who wish to go to a very different approach of a collaborative model of care in which the risk is much more owned by the patient than it is owned by the clinician, you need a unit in a clinic that is absolutely prepared to do that. I don't think geography needs to be the same boundary that it has always been, and technology is going to play an enormous part in making that happen.
Thank you. Yes, as Lesley takes the mic, don't forget that today we discussed about what, for example, data transparency, what Lala's unit is doing. Best center, best experience result, highest center of highest achievement of pumps. Now, when you look at the data, you're going to turn around and go like, well, do you know what? I can't even get anything basic where I am. Should I go and see him? He's a nice chap as well. But the point is that data transparency needs to come. And I think it will come. It will come for, yes, Imperial, King's, Portsmouth, Southampton. It will become open and let people decide based on your results. That's not a problem there at all. But
thank you. I just wanted to throw into the mix that the hub and spoke model has its pros and cons. One of the cons is that if we're trying to make diabetes technology something that's part of an ordinary, for want of a better word, well-functioning type 1 clinic, then we don't want the hub and spoke model. And we're talking at the moment mostly about DIY closing the loop, perhaps, but even if it was plug and play and really simple, not everybody wants to be connected to something. So we need to look at technology as a continuum. And where do you put that line where something becomes specialist that you need to go to a hub? Do you put it when you've got every piece of equipment that you need to have, in which case when you've got a pump and then CGM gets added on, you need to go somewhere else? Or do you put it when you've got one piece of technology, such as a CGM or a pump? Or do you put it when you've got one piece of technology that's not using a battery, such as using the right length and width pen needle? That's technology. What about using decision-making tools? So it's not a battery in that you're already carrying a smartphone, but that's a piece of technology as well. And we're looking at smart pens coming very soon. So then you'll have your smartphone, you'll have your smart meter that makes dosage decisions for you, and you can have a smart pen as well that will upload to the internet straight away, not only what time you dosed, but how much you took as well, so that you can then have better bolus advice based on insulin on board. So if you're looking at all these things as well, at what point does somebody need to go to a technology clinic? And isn't it better to make sure that all diabetologists, all physicians in DGHs who are seeing people with type 1 know how to work with these things, because they're the future?
Okay, Tim, one small comment, and then I've got a question for MHRA.
Just on that point, is the question not should we have technology centres, but should we have type 1 centres?
Yeah, I'm open to anything. You know, fine. If data says that, as I keep on saying, and I'll echo what Simon said, it's for you all to choose that. If the volume, says that, you know what, we as type 1 diabetes patients would like to go to a centre, I always give you the example. If you were having a surgery of your brain and a pituitary operation, you wouldn't go like, well, I really would like to have it at my local place because somebody can have a go. Is type 1 diabetes different? You tell me, you live with it. I don't. Right? If the whole community turns around and says it's not about appeasing clinicians and telling them to upskill, it's about us getting the best that we can out of the system. Well, the system needs to be responsive, and we will be responsive to that. I think, as I said, that comes to the data and where we think sit. So, I've got a question for MHRA, while if nobody has got anything, is what you've heard through the day, and thanks very much for coming along. You've heard so many things coming, right? You've got technology coming out, left, right, so the company's saying this is our pipeline, and then you've got people going like, well, actually, don't worry about your pipeline. We got our own pipeline, right? Do you think MHRA is, and I'm being devil's advocate deliberately, don't worry, it should not spoil our relationship, yeah?
It won't, don't worry.
Do you think MHRA is nimble enough to keep up with that? Or do you have resource enough? I think that's probably a better question.
Okay, that's a very good question. Myself and Omar, we deal with a lot of the diabetes products. We also have a dedicated software team now, because we're starting to realise that is where this is going. We know that. We're starting to focus on this, and we've been working with our European colleagues on this as well, to make sure that we've got some guidance on our website now about, we're predominantly talking to medical device, but they're not medical device companies, they're software companies actually. And they're actually making medical devices. So if you're starting to make medical claims, you do need to adhere to the regulations. And it's quite difficult to get that balance across to software manufacturers, because they just want to produce software. But there's a real safety implication on that. And I think that's what we would like to impress upon.
Yeah, and I think there is probably an opportunity here, isn't there? It depends on how things go. You talk about the open APS with the pump. That's something probably you guys could start at some stage.
Absolutely.
When you've got time to look into, because that's the role. Because one of the things me and Emma get all the time is this safe? Should we do it? I might have to go to jail, right? And that's a fundamental thing. I think that's where your role probably would be very vital to not only help the population, help us as well as you go along. Thank you. I just wanted to get that out. Question? Yes.
A quick question. Sorry, I'm not very familiar with the English system, or the British system, sorry.
Do you want to know we are having Brexit soon? You told me. Tell me whether you want to know that.
Are there any considerations for the new medical device and the things that might be interested, but there is not enough robust data of thousands of people, etc., to look at like pay for performance incentives or things like that, particularly in diabetes where there's a lot of data and it could be conceivable?
Short answer is yes, and that's why I asked you the question, when are you coming to the UK? You said I'm not coming because Brexit is happening. So I would, yes is the short answer, and you're right about outcome-based measures, pay for performance. That is something which we're discussing with companies who are in the room today, about what are you putting on the table, what do you want in return, what do we get as a payer, and that involves sort of data sets and stuff. So I think that space will keep evolving. So the short answer is, come and talk to us if you're interested in that sort of thing, and we will see what we can do. Any other questions? Okay, Nick. We'll probably have last one, and if there's anything burning, and then because Simon does need to get back to his mother-in-law. Nick.
I'm concerned that we've got lots of motivated people in terms of patients here. We've got excellent examples of great physicians and nurses around the country. But there's still huge variation. People that aren't here, that don't take part in social media, that don't in any way. They just don't know about what's available. And addressing that rather than saying 70% don't have only one type of ABC. Are we indeed listening then like broad this education side of things, or just the common access to the basics?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There is no, so I think there is also, and Emma and Pratik and Lala will know, and Roman will know exactly what I'm going to say, is that there is a belief that if you're a consultant in diabetes, you know everything about diabetes, including technology. The short answer is no, you don't. I can tell you that because the training doesn't give you mandatory training on technology and everything. There's a belief it does, it doesn't. Okay? So just for example, in Portsmouth, all the technology work is done by Ian Cranston. I know what a pump is, I know how to handle it, I know what to do, but it's done by him because, well, he's the expert. That's what he does. Now, you're right about the variation, and that is the part of the work where we go around different hospitals, and there are recommendations for each trust to implement, which includes training, which includes things like what is the quality assurance of you seeing people. So one of the things we're going to start doing, Emma and ourselves, is the CGM in pregnancy work is going to try and entail that. We're going to look at the Freestyle Libre will come with, okay, do you know what it is? Do you know what training you need? And that's something will all come out. So yes, you're right about having to sort of say that if you're not trained, you shouldn't be doing it. And going back to the point that Lesley made, then it's up to the clinician. Now, after that, if the clinicians say, I don't want to get trained, then you should look after them. That's not very difficult. So that's coming out, and I think I would say the next few months you'll see all of those coming out. We will have a very, and the CGM in pregnancy is a small enough number for us to road test the theory. But will clinicians be ready to say that we are all ready to get trained or not? So the further part of that will be the technology opening, and we'll see where we go with that.
I'd just like to say as well, I think I want to get to the point where people with diabetes can access information about what's happening out there. Because you blink and you miss a new development, and you can't not be reliant on a 20-minute appointment to consult once a year to get that information. In Derby, what we've done is set up a peer support group on Facebook, where in clinic we hand everybody a card saying there's a Derby Type 1 group, and they all go out and join that. And they come back to clinic wanting to talk to me about all the things they've read about. They come in already informed, instead of the usual situation historically where people would come to clinic having never spoken to another person with type 1 diabetes in their life. We need to improve access for people to type 1 diabetes to other people with type 1 diabetes, so that that's a source of information, not a 20-minute appointment.
Just on the back of that, we, as I mentioned when we were talking, Guys is running a peer support group, which I'm going to go along to and talk about the stuff that I do, because most people who are going to that probably haven't seen it. Nearly every hospital does have something like a peer support group. You might have to ask about it. So that's what I encourage people to do, is to go and find out if there is one, and if there isn't, help them set one up.
I think.
I was saying is me and Milan and York and urban centres where the electricity is actually one thing, and I have a lot of
empathy is the word you're looking for. Empathy, not sympathy. But
because, you know, 10 miles down the road is a hospital, there's two consultants who spend 50% of the time in internal medicine, actually in the plant, that's what the foot service, the pregnancy service, the inhaled service, the medical diabetes service, and it's not feasible. They say they want to learn that house, but I don't know if it's happening, and it's not, you know, so there is a challenge if you're in a place where your consultant actually spends less than 5% of his time in diabetes, and actually that main, when it walks through the door, their main responsibility is that when you're doing that, when you're looking for an outside patient, a stroke patient, have a foot ulcer, and to keep this guy out of hospital, rather than to have hospital balance with GK, and the patient and see, and trust them, and to go out of the hospital to make all that usually there. Then you come to that one file, and the basis of having no parents people like pumps once 2 years ago when starting to UK. You know, until he gets 4 more colleagues, he didn't get out the level of expertise and have a lot of someone shows me back in the 40 years, some Italians from the side and one thing. These guys are putting something together. So there is a challenge. Yeah.
okay, right. So without any burning questions, we are over. So I'm going to wrap this up. Can I say a big thank you to all of you on the panel for coming along, especially. And I'm going to wrap the day up by just saying one thing. There is a quote I use, and I always like that. It's not from Gandhi. Not every brown people give quotes from Gandhi. Just getting out there. There are other people who give quotes. This actually comes from some movie or something, and it said something like, your dreams don't die when you falter, your dreams die when you give up. And I think it's important to recognize that we as a team, we are trying to improve things, and it's about, you will have obstacles around the road. And I think the purpose of these days are to try and get people to talk to each other, learn from each other, and then take it back to try and help one more person. That's all you need to do. That's how things sort of improve. That's how things, and James is a very big example. We had a chat about this before that. So, and the final bit I would say is that one of the questions we always get is that, so these sort of events, when you do it, do you get paid? I can absolutely assure you, none of the speakers today has got a single penny. They've come out of their own free will, given up their own weekend to come here, and for that I'm very, very grateful. That is all boiled down to me picking up the phone or emailing them or bribing them with something. But bar that, nobody's done this. So a big, big thank you to all the people who've turned up, to the industry partners, and lastly I probably would say thank you to Ellie and Ben, because without Ben I don't think this would have come off the ground last year. So it's been brilliant. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for coming along. It's been much appreciated. Thank you.
One final thing, everybody. If you do want to hang around and talk about anything that's been talked about today, we generally go to the pub after these events. So if you hang around outside, somebody will take you to where we're going to go.